What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected legends sits across from daytime television's most ruthless host? A masterclass in composure, conflict, and chaos unfolds. And not even Denzel Washington could have seen it coming. He came for a conversation. But what he got was an ambush. And the storm was already brewing. The studio lights blazed down on the polished set of The View, the faint hum of cameras and murmurs of anticipation hanging in the air. The audience clapped and whooped as the stage manager waved the cue cards. Joy Behar flashed her practiced smile, adjusted her notes, and shot a glance at the rest of the panel. Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin, Sarah Haynes, and Anna Navarro, all of them poised, ready. "All right, folks," Joy purred into the microphone, her voice syrupy with just a hint of steel underneath. "We're back, and our next guest needs no introduction. He's a two-time Oscar winner, a trailblazer, and, some might say, one of the last real movie stars. Please welcome Denzel Washington." The audience erupted into applause as the curtains parted and Denzel stepped out. He moved with that quiet, effortless authority, a dark gray suit jacket over a crisp black shirt, every inch of him controlled, dignified, magnetic. He offered a nod to the cheering crowd, a faint smile on his lips as he crossed the stage, shaking a few hands before settling into the guest chair opposite the panel. From the very first moment, something in the air shifted. The host greeted him warmly, at least on the surface. Whoopi leaned forward, clasping his hand briefly with an affectionate grin. Sarah complimented his suit. Anna chimed in with a comment about her admiration for his humanitarian work. Denzel responded with measured gratitude, his deep voice calm and deliberate. But Joy sat back at first, her arms crossed loosely, that signature smirk playing at her lips. The audience clapped a little longer than usual, maybe sensing they were about to see something unusual. Whoopi started the interview on safe ground. "Denzel, let me just say, what a pleasure it is to have you here. We've all grown up watching your movies, and now you've got this memoir out. Can you tell us what inspired you to write it now?" Denzel nodded thoughtfully, leaning slightly forward. "Well, Whoopi, I've always believed in telling my own story before someone else tells it for me. I wanted to put down what I've learned, not just about acting, but about life, in my own words. You know, we all have a story. I just thought it was time to share mine." The audience applauded warmly. But before the applause even faded, Joy struck. "That's nice," she said, her voice just a little too sweet. "But let me ask you something, Denzel. You've been in this business, what, 40, 50 years now? That's a long time. Do you ever worry," she paused for effect, "that maybe your moment has passed?" The audience let out a faint gasp. Denzel didn't flinch. He sat back, folding his hands in his lap, his expression calm but with a glint of steel behind his eyes. "Well, Joy," he said slowly, "I think the moment you start chasing relevance is the moment you lose it. I don't do this for headlines, I do it for the work. The work speaks, always has, always will." Joy raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. "Sure," she drawled, "but don't you think there's a difference between being respected and being remembered? Hollywood's a young person's game, isn't it? The industry's moved on. Maybe it's time you did too." A ripple of discomfort spread through the audience. Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightening just for a moment before he answered. "Hollywood may be a young person's game, Joy," he said evenly, "but wisdom never goes out of style, and it doesn't need permission to sit at the table." That drew a few claps and a small murmur of approval from the crowd. Joy leaned back, unfazed. "Oh, wisdom. That's a good spin. But come on, Denzel, be honest. You're not exactly leading box offices these days. Maybe the audience has spoken." Denzel's lips curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes had hardened now. "Maybe," he replied, his voice as smooth as glass. "Or maybe the audience is just tired of being told who they're supposed to care about by people who've never stepped on a set." A smattering of applause broke out, but it didn't dampen the simmer in Joy's tone. Anna Navarro chimed in, perhaps sensing an opportunity to pile on. "And lately you've been pretty vocal about politics, haven't you? Don't you think actors should stick to acting? Leave the hard conversations to the grown-ups? Denzel chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's funny, he said, how actors are told to stick to acting, but talk show hosts get to talk about everything under the sun. Is that how it works? This time the crowd laughed, genuinely, and even Whoopi hid a small smile behind her hand. But Joy wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She leaned forward now, her elbows on the table, her eyes sharp. All right, Denzel, let's cut through the poetry for a second. Don't you think that when someone stays in the spotlight as long as you have, it starts to look desperate? Why not just bow out gracefully before the audience stops clapping? That last line hung in the air like a knife. Denzel sat very still, his hands still clasped, his expression calm, but his eyes darkened just slightly. Joy, he said, his voice dropping lower, quieter, but carrying more weight than ever. There's nothing graceful about letting people like you decide when someone's finished. You're talking about clapping? You might want to ask yourself why this audience claps for you every morning. Because it sure isn't for the grace. The crowd audibly gasped now, some even cheering. Joy's smirk faltered for the first time. The camera caught Whoopi exchanging a glance with Sarah, Anna looking down at her notes. And in that quiet moment before the next question could be asked, Denzel straightened his jacket and sat taller, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. The storm was still gathering, but everyone could feel the first drops already falling. The tension in the room was no longer subtle. Denzel's measured calmness was beginning to crack, and Joy Behar was just getting started. You could feel it now, the kind of quiet before a storm you can't outrun. He had come to talk about his legacy, but they came to dismantle it, and Denzel was done pretending he didn't notice. The air in the studio had thickened into something oppressive, electric. Every word Joy delivered now was like another log on the fire, and the audience seemed to feel it too. Some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward in fascination, unable to look away. Denzel sat there, stone-faced, his body still but his eyes alive, scanning the panel like a general sizing up a battlefield. Joy leaned forward, clearly emboldened by his silence, her voice cutting. You know, Denzel, she began, tilting her head slightly, there's something to be said for knowing when it's time to step aside. You've had your run, a great run, but isn't it selfish to keep taking roles and attention from the next generation? Don't you think you're just in the way at this point? There was an audible reaction from the audience, half gasp, half murmured outrage, but Joy didn't flinch. She thrived on moments like this. Denzel didn't speak right away. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, and let the silence stretch. When he finally answered, his voice was soft but laced with ice. If knowing when to step aside means leaving the stage for mediocrity, Joy, then no, I don't think it's time yet. The crowd cheered at that, louder this time, but Joy simply waved her hand dismissively, as though batting away an annoying fly. Oh, come on, Denzel, you can't tell me you don't see it. The reviews of your last few movies weren't exactly glowing. Some people say your performances are predictable, formulaic, maybe even outdated. Do you even read the reviews anymore? Denzel's eyes narrowed. I don't need to read reviews to know who I am, he replied, voice steady. And if you think I measure my worth by what critics say, then you've misunderstood me from the start. Sarah Haynes tried to jump in, perhaps sensing things were spiraling out of control. But surely, Denzel, she said carefully, there's some value in feedback, right? In evolving? Denzel turned his gaze on her, sharp and unyielding. Feedback is only valuable when it's honest, when it comes from a place of respect, not when it's manufactured to sell magazines or fill airtime. Whoopi, who had been silent until now, interjected, trying to break the rising tension. Well, we're just here to have a real conversation. You've got to admit, though, some people say you're too serious, that maybe you've lost touch with the audience because you take yourself too seriously. Any truth to that? Denzel's laugh was dry and humorless. Lost touch? I've been playing to packed theaters for longer than some of you have been on TV. You think that happens by being out of touch? Or is it just easier for you to believe I got lucky? The silence that followed was deafening, but Joy wasn't finished. She leaned back, arms crossed, her smile returning, but now tinged with something cruel. Well, you certainly believe you are special, don't you? Always the hero, always the wise man with the big speech. But maybe, just maybe, you're not as indispensable as you think. Maybe the industry has moved on, and you're just another actor who doesn't know how to bow out gracefully. This time, the gasp from the audience was audible, louder, sharper. Denzel's composure wavered for the first time. His fingers tightened on the arm of the chair. His jaw worked as he held back whatever was boiling inside. "Let me tell you something about bowing out, Joy," he said finally, his voice low but cutting. "You don't get to write my ending, and you sure as hell don't get to tell me when my story's over. I've spent my life earning my place, step by step, fight by fight. I don't take my cues from a host who thinks reading cue cards makes her an authority on my life." The applause that followed was hesitant, as though the audience wasn't sure whether to clap or just brace for what would come next. Joy leaned forward now, her tone sharper. "Oh, please, Denzel, you talk about your career like it's some kind of noble mission. But at the end of the day, it's just movies, just acting. You're not curing cancer. You're just playing pretend. So maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop acting like you're better than everyone else." That was it. Something in Denzel's eyes changed, hardened. He straightened in his seat, then leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think this is just acting? You think it's just pretend? You ever stood in front of a camera and bled your soul into a scene? You ever carried a whole story on your shoulders because no one else in the room believed you could? You think that's easy? You think that's nothing?" Joy opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off, his voice now rising. "The difference between you and me, Joy, is I know what it means to fight for something. You sit here behind a desk, lobbing insults at people who've done more than you could even dream of, and call it journalism. But all you've really done is make a career out of tearing people down so you can feel taller." The audience erupted into applause, not the nervous kind this time, but full-throated approval. Joy's smile finally cracked, replaced by something hard, almost panicked. She glanced at the other hosts, but none of them moved to her defense. Denzel leaned back slowly, his expression cool now, but his eyes still burning. "You want to talk about relevance? Fine, let's talk about it. When you've spent 50 years building something worth remembering, come find me. Until then, don't you dare tell me what my legacy is worth." The crowd rose to its feet, cheering, some even shouting his name. Joyce sat frozen, her face a mask of barely contained fury, her fingers white-knuckled around her note cards. And in that moment, everyone in the studio knew. The storm was here. The air in the studio was no longer electric. It was volatile. Every camera, every audience member, every host felt it now. Denzel Washington was no longer playing along. This was no longer just an interview. This was a trial, and Denzel was about to deliver his verdict. After Denzel's last word, "Don't you dare tell me what my legacy is worth," a stunned silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the studio lights. But Joy Behar, stubborn and unwilling to concede, sat up straighter and smoothed her note cards as though nothing had happened. "All right," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. "If you're finished with your little monologue, maybe we can move on to a real question. Or do you plan on giving speeches through all afternoon?" Denzel's head tilted just slightly, his eyes narrowing, a faint, incredulous smile curling at the corner of his mouth. The audience groaned, some booed, but Joy pressed on, either oblivious or uncaring. "Because while you're busy patting yourself on the back," she continued, "the reality is, your last 3 films bombed. Critics said you were out of touch. Audiences stopped showing up. Isn't it time you face the fact that maybe Hollywood has moved on and left you behind?" Denzel's fingers drummed against the arm of his chair slowly, deliberately. His voice was calm, but underlined with steel. "You keep talking about Hollywood like it's some kind of moral compass, like it's the judge of a man's worth. You think box office numbers tell you who someone is? You think critics define my legacy? His laugh was bitter now. You want to know what defines me, Joy? Not reviews, not your cheap shots. What defines me is knowing I walked into rooms where they didn't want me, delivered performances they couldn't ignore, and opened doors for people who came after me. That's what stays long after the lights go out on shows like this. The crowd erupted in applause again, but Joy, unshaken, or pretending to be, cut back in. Please spare me the martyr act, she said, her voice sharpening. You're not Rosa Parks. You're not Martin Luther King. You're just another overpaid actor who thinks reciting lines makes him a hero. That one landed like a slap. Denzel's entire demeanor changed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping low enough that everyone instinctively leaned in. You want to compare me to real heroes? Fine. I've stood on picket lines. I've spoken in churches where civil rights leaders bled. I've paid bail for protesters you wouldn't even bother to look at. I've used every ounce of privilege I earned to shine light where people like you won't even look. So don't you dare reduce me to just an actor. The words echoed like thunder through the studio, but Joy wasn't done. Her lip curled into a smirk. Sounds like you're confusing activism with self-promotion, she said, her words sharp as glass. Every time you speak out, it conveniently coincides with a movie release, doesn't it? Almost like it's all just publicity. The audience gasped. Even the other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Now, but Joy pressed on. I mean, tell me, when was the last time you actually did something for someone without a camera rolling? Or is that not your brand? Denzel froze for half a beat, then chuckled. Low, humorless. You really want to go there? His eyes locked on hers now. No more soft edges. You sit here every day pretending to care about justice, about truth, about people. But all you're really doing is turning pain into punchlines. You think being on TV gives you the right to dissect other people's lives, to humiliate them for sport. But you wouldn't last 5 minutes walking the path I walked to get here. The audience roared in approval, but the studio felt on the brink of something dangerous now. Joy rolled her eyes theatrically. Oh, please, Denzel, don't pretend you're some kind of saint. We all know about your reputation, the ego, the temper, the stories of you berating crew members, alienating directors. You're not the untouchable legend you think you are. Denzel leaned back, laughing softly, but there was no humor in it. You've got a lot of nerve, he said, voice rising now. Sitting there behind that desk, hiding behind gossip and hearsay, trying to diminish what you couldn't even begin to understand. He stood up slowly, towering over the panel now. Let me explain something to you, Joy, and everyone else here. I've worked my entire life to build something real, something that matters. And every single thing I've earned the hard way. Nothing was handed to me. Nothing was free. And no, I don't owe you or Hollywood or anyone else an apology for surviving it. The crowd was on their feet now, clapping, cheering, but he didn't even glance at them. His eyes were locked on Joy as he continued. You want to talk about ego, about temper? Try walking into a room where no one wants you there, over and over, and still delivering excellence every single time. Try carrying the weight of representation for generations, while people like you sit here and tear you down for ratings. Joy opened her mouth, but Denzel didn't give her the chance. You think you know me? You don't know a damn thing. And if you think you can sit there and reduce me to tabloid headlines and box office stats, then you're even more clueless than you look. The studio was dead quiet now. Even the other hosts sat frozen, eyes darting between them. Denzel took a step closer to the panel, his presence suffocating the space. You've made a career out of humiliating people, Joy. But today, you picked the wrong man. For the first time, all Miss Joy looked rattled, her carefully constructed armor cracking under the weight of his words. The crowd was now chanting his name. Denzel, Denzel, Denzel. Denzel straightened his jacket, his jaw tight, his breathing steady. You wanted a show? You got one. But understand this, every word you said today doesn't define me. It defines you. With that, he stepped back from the panel, his hand hovering over the microphone clipped to his jacket. And everyone in the studio knew the storm wasn't over yet. Some moments on live television become history, not because of what's said, good eating, but because of what's finally no longer left unsaid, and Denzel Washington had nothing left to hold back. This wasn't just an exit. This was a reckoning. The audience was still chanting his name when Denzel's fingers unclipped the microphone from his jacket with one sharp motion. The soft electronic pop of his mic disconnecting echoed through the hushed studio like a gunshot. For a moment, he just stood there, the cable dangling from his hand, his eyes locked on Joy Behar, who sat frozen in her chair. A brittle smile painted across her face, but her eyes betraying something else entirely. Fear. "You want to know what the difference is between you and me, Joy?" he asked, his voice low but carried across the room, unamplified yet somehow louder than anything that had come before. "I've spent my life building something that matters. You've spent yours tearing people down because you thought no one would ever push back." He took a slow step forward, the weight of his presence pressing down on the entire set. "Well, surprise," the audience gasped. Joy tried to retort, her voice cracking slightly. "Denzel, you're overreacting. We ask tough questions. That's what we do here." But he cut her off, his hand shooting up in a quiet, commanding gesture. "Don't." The single syllable silenced her immediately. He scanned the rest of the panel now. Whoopi, Sunny, Sarah, Alyssa, each of them avoiding his gaze. Their earlier smirks long gone, replaced with a cocktail of regret, shame, and fear of what he might say next. "You sit here day after day pretending you're journalists, pretending you care. But you're not. You're not journalists. You are not critics. You are not even entertainers. You're predators, dressed up in lighting and makeup, feeding on other people's lives to fill your airtime." A shocked murmur ran through the audience. "You think your job is to keep people accountable, but all you're doing is keeping yourselves relevant by humiliating others. You manufacture outrage like it's oxygen, and you wonder why nobody respects you anymore." Joy shifted in her seat, her hands clutching her note cards so tightly her knuckles went white. "You wanted to talk about my moment being over? About my ego? My temper? Fine. You want the truth?" He leaned closer to her, his voice dropping into a whisper. The entire room still somehow heard. "I don't need this chair. I don't need your cameras. And I sure as hell don't need your approval. You're not capable of giving it, because all you know how to do is tear down what you'll never understand." The audience erupted in applause. Not polite, not tentative, but loud and visceral, like the sound of a dam breaking. Joy opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "Here's what's going to happen now," Denzel continued, standing to his full height, sliding the microphone onto the table in front of him. "I'm going to walk out of here. You're going to spin this however you want. Denzel storms off. Denzel overreacts. Whatever narrative you need to sleep tonight." He paused, scanning the room, his stare freezing every person in place. "But everyone watching, everyone in this room already knows the truth. And you're going to have to live with the fact that you showed the world who you really are today. Not me. You." Joy visibly swallowed, her face red now, her eyes darting around for someone, anyone, to rescue her. But no one moved. Denzel finally turned toward the cameras, addressing the audience at home directly. "If you take nothing else from what you have seen today, take this. You don't have to sit quietly while people try to diminish you. You don't have to accept disrespect just because it's wrapped in fake smiles and designer clothes. You don't have to let anyone to decide what your worth is. Not Hollywood, not critics, and sure as hell not some morning talk show." He straightened his jacket, gave the faintest, sharpest nod, and said, more to himself than to anyone else, "Not today." And with that, he turned and walked toward the studio doors. The cameras followed every step of his departure, each stride deliberate, steady, monumental. When he reached the threshold, he stopped, turned back one final time, and delivered his closing line. "Good luck explaining this to your viewers." And then he was gone. The studio was dead quiet. The audience sat in stunned silence, their applause now replaced by awe. The hosts sat motionless on their stools, their eyes downcast, their hands fiddling with notes they'd long since forgotten how to read. For the first time in the history of The View, nobody knew what to say next. The cameras panned over the red sofa where Denzel had been sitting moments earlier. Now just an empty space filled with more presence than any of them could muster. Behind the glass, producers were frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but even the director couldn't take his eyes off the stage. Denzel's words hung in the air like smoke. Impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. What started as a routine promotional appearance had become something else entirely. A public reckoning, a seismic shift, a live televised warning to everyone who thought they could play games with a man who had spent his entire life fighting to earn everything they took for granted. The hosts remained frozen, their carefully cultivated personas shattered under the weight of what had just happened. And somewhere backstage, Denzel Washington adjusted his jacket, ran a hand over his chin, and stepped into the sunlight outside, unbroken, unbowed, and more legendary than ever. What did you think of Denzel Washington's response? Did he go too far, or was it exactly what needed to be said? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.